Welcome to Pasadena Monthly. I'm your host, Justin Chapman. Thanks so much for being here. After taking a look at what's been going on in Pasadena this past month, we'll speak with our guest, Dr. Richard Rosenthal, Pasadena's independent police auditor. But before we get started, let's check out these Pasadena media news briefs.
California Governor Gavin Newsom has signed Senate Bill 2 into law. This is a gun control measure authored by Senator Anthony Portantino, who represents Pasadena and the 25th District in the Senate. This bill adds to California's gun permit law by addressing the recent ruling by the Supreme Court to ease acquisition of concealed carry weapons permits. This bill aims to ensure public safety and protect against gun violence. The new law intends to ensure that those who carry firearms in public are responsible and law-abiding. The minimum age requirement for a license is 21 years old. Senator Portantino said, "When SB 2 is implemented, it will certainly increase public safety and, I believe, save lives." JPL is managing and operating NASA's Psyche mission. The Psyche spacecraft successfully blasted off aboard a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket from Kennedy Space Center, marking the first journey to a metal-rich world. After liftoff, the rocket's second stage climbed to a high altitude and the fairings separated and returned to Earth. About an hour later, the spacecraft separated from the rocket. "I'm so proud of the Psyche team, who overcame many challenges on their way to this exciting day," said Lori Leshin, JPL director. "Now the real fun begins as we race toward asteroid Psyche to unlock the secrets of how planets form and evolve." Initial telemetry reports show that the spacecraft is in good health and awaiting further commands from mission controllers on Earth.
Pasadena health officials last week confirmed in the city an extremely rare case of local transmission of the dengue virus, which is contracted through Aedes mosquito bites. They said that although the infected individual did not travel recently, this was likely an isolated incident and there is a very low risk of additional exposure in Pasadena. This was the first known case of a person being infected in all of California who had not traveled. Symptoms of the virus include fever, nausea, vomiting, rash, and aches and pains to the eyes, muscles, joints, or bones. Most patients get better in 1 to 2 weeks, but severe cases can be fatal and must be treated immediately. The San Gabriel Valley Mosquito and Vector Control District is working with the Pasadena Public Health Department to mount additional surveillance, mosquito control, and educational outreach in the Pasadena neighborhood where the case was confirmed. 2. Pasadena unveiled the new pool and aquatic center at 1081 North Fair Oaks Avenue this month. The pool was named after the Honorable John J. Kennedy, the late Pasadena City Council member. The $5.9 million renovation project includes a new pool with walk-in access, a renovated pool deck, accessible showers in the existing pool building, new restroom facilities, lighting, and resurfaced parking lot. The city's Parks, Recreation, and Community Services Department also announced that it will offer year-round aquatics programming, including swim lessons, water aerobics, recreational lap swimming, and more. 3. The City Council's Municipal Services Committee this month decided to delay approval of the Water and Power Department's proposed 2023 Integrated Resource Plan and asked them to come back to the committee with stronger scenarios to achieve the city's goal of sourcing 100% of its electricity from carbon-free sources by 2030, 15 years earlier than the state's deadline. The plan, which is a document that outlines how a utility plans to meet its energy and capacity needs, is required to be filed with the state by the end of the year. Committee members pointed out that the proposed plan did not lay out how the city would achieve the 2030 goal and asked the department to come back to the committee next month before going to the full council. 4. The Pasadena Rental Housing Board this week voted to authorize a term sheet with the board's request to integrate the board as a new city department called the Rent Stabilization Department, with a department director and staff. It will be presented to the council before the end of the year. The board is also working with Beehive Consulting to prepare a staffing plan, which is expected to be presented to the full board next month. The board also approved a resolution requiring landlords to pay interest annually on rental security deposits held for at least a year and set the 2024 interest rate at 0.41%. The council approved the board's request to increase the amount of its contract with Goldfarb and Lippman LLP, which is drafting rules and regulations related to the enforcement of the voter-approved rent control measure. This month, the board held 2 workshops about navigating Measure H, one for tenants and one for landlords, hosted by a rent control expert. 5. The Pasadena City College Board of Trustees hired AGB Search to begin a nationwide process to look for the college's next superintendent president. Since July, Dr. Jose Gomez began serving as interim superintendent president for 1 year. Meanwhile, trustee John Martin, who has been on the board since 1979, announced that he will not seek re-election next year. And also this month, the college rededicated its iconic and cornerstone Building C in honor of Dr. Jack Scott, the former PCC president, community college chancellor, state assembly member, and state senator for the Pasadena area, who's now 90 years old. 6. The Pasadena Unified School District Board of Education approved a plan by a student-led think tank to begin a search for local high school students to serve on the board by the end of the year. The think tank proposal establishes a 6-student council, including 1 junior from each high school, and an elected 24-student assembly, which will cast a predetermined preferential vote on behalf of all students on 6 campuses. Meanwhile, interim superintendent Dr. Elizabeth Blanco convened a community town hall meeting this month where she discussed the district's strategic plan and other district-related issues. 7. Pasadena's Department of Transportation will hold a community town hall on November 16th at 686 South Fair Oaks Avenue to present the city's parking strategic plan, which was developed by contractor Dixon Resources Unlimited. The plan outlines the steps needed to implement an effective and efficient parking and mobility program in the city, incorporates past parking studies, stakeholder feedback, an assessment of current operations and industry best practices, and offers recommendations to optimize operations and enhance the parking experience citywide. Throughout the past year, the city has been actively engaging stakeholders in the parking study process, holding in-person and virtual community meetings, and conducting site visits and surveys. The plan is available on the Transportation Department's website. 8. Mayor Gordo, Assistant City Manager David Reyes, 710 Senior Project Manager Wendy Macias, and Reconnecting Communities 710 Advisory Group Chair Danny Parker this month traveled to Madera, California to deliver an update on the 710 stub planning process to the California Transportation Commission. They detailed progress made in the 1 year since the state relinquished control of the 50-acre property to the city, including acquiring a $2 million federal grant, $180 million in transportation improvement funds from Metro, creating the advisory group of community members, contracting with consultant firm Point C, and hiring professionals such as the senior project manager and a historian, which is still underway. This week, the advisory group heard a presentation on specific plans as an implementation tool of the 710 study area, and the group plans to work on a report to help the council develop policies and goals for the property. On Monday, the council will consider contracts with firms to help prepare for the purchase and sale of 17 vacant Caltrans properties that will soon be sold to the city, and to provide security guard, property inspection, and broker listing services. 9. Pasadena's Continuum of Care, a planning body designated by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and a network of local stakeholders, service providers, community members, and city departments, presented its proposed 5-year homelessness plan to the Council's Economic Development and Technology Committee this month. The plan aims to cut homelessness in Pasadena in half over the next 5 years by housing 1,200 people. The plan will also establish a prevention committee to develop prevention strategies. Let's patch in our guest, Dr. Richard Rosenthal, Pasadena's independent police auditor. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Dr. Rosenthal is a former LA County public corruption prosecutor who was responsible for uncovering the LAPD Rampart scandal in the 90s. He has created police oversight agencies in Portland, Denver, and British Columbia. He received his PhD in criminology from Simon Fraser University and British Columbia, and with an emphasis on civilian oversight of the police. His PhD dissertation evaluated the implementation of the federal consent decree in Seattle, Washington. So can you briefly tell us about your career, Dr. Rosenthal, and about your role in the Rampart scandal?
Sure. Well, I can start off with the Rampart scandal. So I was the prosecutor originally assigned to what was then referred to as the Robbery Homicide Division Task Force, which was looking into potential or allegations of systemic corruption within an LAPD. And I primarily became involved in prosecuting and turning a police officer, Rafael Perez, who then disclosed what he alleged to be widespread misconduct within the Rampart Crash Unit, which was the gang unit. I ended up becoming the director or the deputy in charge of what we refer to as the cleanup team, but in prosecutorial parlance, it's more known as the dirty team, where I was actually allowed inside LAPD internal affairs. I was the first outsider in the history of the LAPD allowed to monitor and review internal affairs investigations as they related to Rampart. And as a result of the scandal, I still remember writing something like it was an 8-page memo, draft memo to the police commission, based upon everything that I learned from being inside LAPD, making recommendations on how to improve their ability to police themselves and hold their officers accountable, because there were huge problems with how LAPD was policing itself at the time. And remember, this was pre-consent decree. In fact, the consent decree occurred because of the Rampart scandal, in large part. I took it to the then assistant DA, who basically told me, we're not going to go there, not our job. We're prosecutors. If a police officer's committed a crime, we prosecute them. If not, we move on. And it was at that point that I realized what I really wanted to do was have the opportunity to impact policing and reduce the risk of police misconduct and police uses of lethal force. And the only way to do that was to become involved in oversight. And oversight was a very new profession at the time. There were only a handful of cities that had professional oversight organizations. The police auditor monitor model of oversight was brand new. I think at the time that I started, it was really only San Jose that had one. And I was very quickly hired by the city of Portland to be the director of the Independent Police Review Division of the city auditor, which was their first police auditor program. I was there for 4 years, and then I got contacted by the city and county of Denver, and they were looking to create their own monitor program to replace an oversight system that was not respected by their police or community. And they asked my advice on what to do. And the way I've always liked to say, I told them the good, the bad, and the ugly of the Portland program. And then later appeared, they took the good, they got rid of the bad, and they prettied up the ugly, and they made what I felt was and still is one of the most foremost oversight programs in the country. So I went over to Denver. I was there for 7 years. Ended up in a bit of a conflict with the police union because we reformed police discipline in Denver, and we started fire officers for lying, which was something that hadn't been done for 100 years. And so at that point, I decided after 7 years, it was really a good time for me to move on and give somebody else an opportunity to take over the helm of that organization. I'd really built a strong foundation. And I went to British Columbia, which has a system of oversight that didn't exist in the US until just recently. And even now it's just being set up, and it's called the Independent Critical Incident Investigation Agency form of oversight, or ICIIA. And that's where civilian oversight organization conducts criminal investigations of police uses of deadly force. So that kind of organization exists all over Canada, the UK, South Africa, Jamaica, not in the US until the Washington Office of Independent Investigations, which is just being stood up now. And I actually helped, I was their primary consultant in setting up that organization. I've also been on the federal monitoring team in Cleveland. I'm a consultant to the federal monitoring team in Seattle.
What does an independent police auditor do, and why does Pasadena have one now?
This program was created, obviously, there was a large amount of public support for civilian oversight in Pasadena. The IPA, or Independent Police Auditor, is really, in some ways, the community's eyes and ears into the police department, and in other ways, a subject matter expert who can provide technical advice to the police department on how they can ensure accountability within their own organization. So I'm a bit of a bridge between the community and the police.
And tell us about the report you put together about Pasadena's use of force incidents and your 10 recommendations that came out of that.
At least for the period that I reviewed, I did not see any systemic use of unconstitutional force by police officers. I did see that there was an ability of the department to improve on some of those investigations, particularly at the street level with the street sergeants, on how they conducted those investigations. I found that on the whole, the Use of Force Review Board did an admirable job of reviewing these case investigations, although I did have some concerns with some findings that I've addressed with the department on an ongoing basis. The really big issue that I found was non-compliance with the body-worn camera policies. And what I found was that in only 22%, excuse me, of the cases that I reviewed, did all the officers who were involved activate their body-worn cameras in accordance with policy. And in another 30% of the time, the subject officer, at least one subject officer, failed to activate his or her camera prior to a categorical use of force. And there's another about almost 50% where either a witness officer or responding officer failed to activate the camera in accordance with policy, or where even though the body-worn camera was activated in time to capture the incident, it did not necessarily capture what led up to the incident, which is extremely important. So I've made recommendations to the department on how to improve that policy. Waiting actually should be hearing from the department mid-November on any changes they're going to be making. And I'm really looking forward to seeing both the policy improved and the training improved so officers truly understand what the expectations are. Right now, the officers are more doing it. There's a lot of discretion and they really have the ability to choose for themselves when they want to activate it and deactivate it. So we need to make it consistent. And that, in essence, allows us to better evaluate all the uses of force and establish that, in fact, they're in compliance with policy and the Constitution, and that if an officer is not compliant, that the officer can be held accountable.
Is the police department working with you to implement your recommendations and also previous recommendations from a number of other reports in the past?
Right. So what we're doing right now is it was one of the recommendations that came out of the OIR group, which I completely agreed with, which was the need to track and report on recommendations that have been made. And what the OIR did was, they had conducted 2 prior reviews of officer-involved shootings, and then they conducted the review of the Anthony McLean shooting. And they found that there were some recommendations they had previously made that had been said that were accepted, but that didn't actually seem to either have been implemented or at least had somehow fallen by the wayside. Mm-hmm. And it is one of the things historically in policing that happens over and over again. And it's not even necessarily as a result of any intentional desire to do so, but you get these blue ribbon commission panels or these special investigations or commissions or groups who look at incidents, evaluate them, make recommendations to reduce the risk of them happening in the future, and identifying better practices for the department to engage in. And then everyone says, okay, yeah, that's great. You get a lot of fanfare. The department says they're going to recommend or implement the recommendations. Then in essence, those reports just end up on the bookshelf covered with dust. Mm-hmm. So it's really important. And one of the things we've learned in oversight is the importance of having an auditor or monitor who consistently reviews those past recommendations to ensure not just implementation, but compliance in the long term. So what we've done is we've actually put together a work group with the CPOC, or I have, and we're working on a spreadsheet which identifies all of the recommendations that have been made by the OIR group, by the National Police Foundation, by myself, and we'll be tracking the status of the implementation of each of those recommendations. So we've already gotten quite a nice distance in the sense of, I think I've got a very strong draft spreadsheet. Now the question is turning into a dashboard that can be easily viewed, reviewed, and by the public and the police, mm-hmm. and by myself and the CPOC, so that we can keep track of all of these recommendations. There are over 100 that have been made. Some obviously are no longer applicable, or maybe not even according to best practice anymore, given that they were made many years ago. But it's really important to see what's been recommended, what's happened to them, and why. So that's a long-term project. The department has been excellent as far as collaborating on this, and I actually do see it as a joint project between the CPOC, the IPA, and the department.
Uh-huh. That's great. And one improvement I understand you've identified for the police department is the timing of the release of their critical incident investigation results. So tell us about that and how you think that can be improved.
Yeah, so it's one of the first things that I noted when I came to Pasadena. And remember, I was in the prosecutor's office and the DA's office from, I'm going to show my age now, about 1986 through 2001. And I was a member of the Special Investigation Division, which is now the Justice System Integrity Division. And that division rolled out to shootings and did all the reviews of shootings. And while obviously there is lots of controversy over the fact that there were very few shootings that were ever criminally prosecuted, certainly during that period of time and even going into the future, they were reviewed fairly quickly, in the sense that within about at least 6 months, you would get a decision by the DA onto whether or not criminal charges would be filed. When I got here, what I saw was cases that were years old. And in fact, the case involving Mr. McLean, the DA didn't issue his letter saying that he was not going to file criminal charges until a year and 7 months after the incident. And in fact, that was fast compared to the other ones. What we've seen now is we had a fairly recent one where it took 4 years. The incident took place May 7th of 2019, and it wasn't until May 25th of 2023 that the DA issued his letter saying that no charges would be filed. Another one was 3 years and 2 months. And then we've got two that are pending, one that is almost 2 years old and another that is 15 months old. And the problem is that the department does not conduct, or they hold off on their administrative investigation, which is looking at whether policy or procedure was violated, until the DA decides whether or not criminal charges will be filed. So there are two separate forms of investigations. One can result in prison time, felony conviction. The other can result in termination of employment or suspension or reprimand. The administrative is extremely important, because the reality is that the number of officer-involved shootings where criminal charges are filed and convictions are obtained, still, it's very small, for all kinds of reasons that I won't go into right now. But the reality is the administrative, it's much more common for there to be policy issues, training issues, misconduct issues, equipment issues, all things which can be used to reduce the risk of the use of deadly force in the future. And so when the department waits to conduct their administrative investigation and administrative review of that investigation for 3 or 4 years, little is learned at that point. You know, telling an officer you did wrong 3 years ago and you need to do better doesn't fly. As far as good, it's not good supervision. It's not good for the employee. It's not good for the employer. It's not good for the community. So I came in fairly quickly. I brought in some experts from the Inspector General's office for LA County and LA City to talk about how they, what they consider to be best practices and how LAPD does it. And LAPD does their investigations concurrently with the criminal. And since that time, what's happened is we have had 2 cases resolved by the DA. And so the department is proceeding with those administrative reviews. The chief, I'll give him a lot of credit. He's decided another one of the cases that's been pending for almost 2 years will get an administrative review. So they will start conducting that investigation immediately. And there's one, however, that he said he's going to wait on. So what I'm going to do is we're waiting to get these first 3 through the use of force review boards, and then I'll re-engage with the department about the most recent one. The department's position currently is they'll do it on a case-by-case basis, which is a great improvement over what it was before Chief Harris came in, which was we will always wait for the DA to adjudicate. And again, if you have a DA who's adjudicating quickly in Denver, when I was the monitor, that DA made sure we had adjudication decisions within 6 to 8 weeks on each and every case. We had one in custody death that was particularly complex, where it took them about 4 or 5 months. But when you have that, you can afford to wait. When you have a DA who's taken 3 to 4 years to make a charging decision, waiting it's not acceptable in my mind. And it's something that I'm going to work with the department on going into the future.
Yeah, it sounds like the community and police officer want it to be a quicker process. The council recently extended your contract for another year. What's next for police oversight in Pasadena after your service? Will the oversight commission always need the IPA element to be successful?
So let me just really quickly say, you know, some of the plans, some things we're looking to do. I'm looking to do in the next year. I'm going to be reviewing all internal affairs investigations for thoroughness, completeness, timeliness. I'm looking to potentially reform the disciplinary system through the creation of the disciplinary matrix. looking to create a community police mediation program in Pasadena. Pasadena was one of the first to have done it, and it fell into disuse. I'd like to see it come back. Mm-hmm. And also continuing to monitor use of force review board investigations and working with the CPOC on some of their initiatives, which includes looking at police technology. I will say I know that there's constantly talk about models of oversight, and is this the right model for Pasadena? Mm-hmm. And the reality is oversight is different in every city. We refer to as snowflakes, really. You will not find two oversight systems in the country that are identical. And that's because oversight is created based upon political will, culture, community demands, how policing is done. So very different answers, and there's no best practice in oversight. It's really best fit. What I would say is certainly, I think the IPA position is necessary now and going into the future. I think it provides an excellent opportunity for the commission to have a better understanding of what's going on in the department and have eyes and ears into the department, and also to provide transparency to the community as far as how the department is doing as far as holding itself accountable. So at least in my mind, this position and or any iteration of this position going into the future is a good thing for Pasadena.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, Dr. Rosenthal, we just scratched the surface. There's so many other issues to dive into. I hope to have you back again very soon, but I really appreciate you coming on the show and telling us about the work you're doing.
Hey, my pleasure. And thank you. Thank you for giving me the time.
Before we go, here is this month in Pasadena history. It was this month in 1922 when the Rose Bowl Stadium opened. Designed by architect Myron Hunt in 1921 in a horseshoe shape, the stadium was constructed over 2 years, cost $272,198, and opened on October 8th, 1922. However, it wasn't officially dedicated until January 1st, 1923, when the first Rose Bowl game was played between USC and Penn State. My alma mater, USC, won 14-3, of course. The southern stands, which completed the bowl, were added in 1928. At its height, the stadium's capacity was 104,594 people. Now it's down to 92,542. In terms of its future, well, we're all watching the rift between FIFA and SoFi Stadium very closely as the 2026 World Cup looms on the horizon. Thank you all so much for joining me for this episode of Pasadena Monthly. Tune in every fourth Friday of the month at 5 p.m. Learn more at pasadenamedia.org and justindouglaschapman.com. Drop me a line at jchapman@cityofpasadena.net. We'll see you next time.